Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining the Evotech intelligence briefing. We appreciate everyone's time. We'll kick this off right away. We've only got an hour, but I wanted to first of all kind of talk about the rationale for why we wanted to do this today. We really wanted to hopefully bring some perspective on the events that have transpired over the last couple of weeks relative to the threats that we've been seeing in the news. And from time to time, we see reactions that happen in the marketplace from these threats. And we really wanted to bring some perspective based upon the knowledge and background and experience of our team on how we can potentially mitigate some of these risks in the future, and bring some awareness to how we should think about and approaching these threats in the future. So with that, what we're going to do today is, first thing we're going to do is, the first thing in the agenda, I'll go through some introductions. We'll do an executive overview of what we know about the events that have happened over the last couple of weeks, and then we'll do a panel discussion with our panelists, and then probably the last 15 minutes we'll move to Q&A. So first off, I wanted to do some introductions. We've got Macy Dennis, our Chief Information Security Officer here at Evotech. Macy is a cybersecurity executive with corporate security experience, focusing on all aspects of cyber, information, and physical security. He's a member and advisor of the California Governor's Cyber Task Force and founder and board chair of the San Diego CISO Roundtable here in San Diego. Thanks, Macy, for joining today. We also have Matt Stamper. He's a distinguished member of our CISO practice, former CISO and VP of Services with public and early stage company experience. Matt Stamper brings a broad multidisciplinary knowledge and understanding of cybersecurity best practices to Evotech's clients. Prior to joining Evotech, Matt was a research director with the security and risk management practice at Gartner, where he covered incident response, breach and attack simulation, security orchestration, automation and response, security program design and evaluation, security standards and frameworks, such as ISO 27001 and NIST, as well as privacy. As part of his role at Gartner, Matt met with CISOs and CIOs from across the globe to help them with their most critical security priorities. So thanks, Matt, for joining and being a panelist. Chris Forbes, Chief Information Security Officer and Chief Privacy Officer, formerly at Bank of California, and also Chief Information Security Officer at the Federal Reserve. He's also one of our Evotech CISOs. He's got over 20 years of experience in information security, risk compliance, and privacy, excluding internal regulators. He brings a ton of knowledge and broad experience in the financial industry and other asset management experience. So thanks for joining, Chris, and being one of our panelists. And then finally, John Carruthers. He's an accomplished security professional leader with over 28 years of FBI experience. He brings a wide-ranging skill set to include IT leadership, complex incident response capabilities, and executive level communications. Additionally, John has delivered numerous keynote speeches, industry briefings, and executive level discussions. So welcome, John, and thanks for joining the panelists. So I wanted to turn this over to you, John. Why don't you kind of frame the discussion for the group here as to what we're seeing over the last couple of weeks, and potentially try to put some perspective on some of the news events.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. And yeah, before I get started, I did want to say, well, thank you. And I guess this is my first appearance as an Evotech team member. I've been working with Jeff on the press release that will announce me joining the team, and this webinar kind of outpaced that. So, but thank you very much. I'm honored to be a part of this group. I can tell you that the Evotech thought leadership is without parallel, and I am literally humbled to be a part of this. So anyway, you're all here. Thank you. And now for, yeah, just for some thoughts that I hopefully can bring to kind of table set this conversation. And And before I get started, I did want to borrow kind of tweak a quote from my good friend Matt Stamper and fellow panelist. And let's all make a promise to not, make statements that can't be actioned or followed. And Jason, I know you were going to talk about let's stay away from FUD, right? Let's stay away from the fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Definitely, I think that needs to be kind of a core theme to this conversation. And just my opinion, but the government's ongoing effort to build trust between public and private, this is just basically a rule of thumb for the FBI and a lot of the other agencies. So kind of with that as a framing, it really has been an interesting journey for the FBI and really all of government, as I still say we a fair amount, as they've learned to navigate what to do with threat intelligence and how to A, declassify it, and then B, disseminate it to those that need it most. It's not that I was in the FBI for generations. I was there for a pretty good sized one generation, but the USIC, which is the US intelligence community, acquired classified information and really held on to it. Like that was the kind of the model for years. I always called that collect and file, and that was the wrong model. We needed to be collecting threat intel and getting it into the hands of those that need it. Even within the FBI, counterintelligence agents were super cautious and would rarely share with other squads. And that's okay, because at the end of the day, classified intelligence can only be shared with other cleared parties, and there has to be that need to know component. Without those conditions, the intelligence or information was just not going to get shared. And I think this is a really good time to highlight, again, framing this conversation, that when we talk about classified intelligence, it's typically going to be associated or attributed to foreign governments or nation state activity, which is, again, why we're here today. So kind of transitioning into the cyber field and the cyberspace for the last 20 years has kind of witnessed the birth and growth and maturity of cyber-based nation state activity, right, and intelligence. And the battlefield has clearly moved to cyberspace. I don't think anybody would argue that, especially those that are attending this webinar. All of us operating in industry, which is all of us, right, are living and breathing in this environment. So it directly affects us and our assets and our crown jewels. And we're going to be talking a lot about that as well. Like, what can we be doing to further protect that? And by the way, it used to be very easy for the FBI and the USIC to differentiate between nation state and traditional cyber activity. That line has become extremely blurred, right? And that absolutely necessitates the need for counterintelligence efforts across the spectrum to be even more closely aligned. And the need for public and private collaboration is vital. And I'm probably gonna be hammering that point more than anything today, is the absolute need for us in private sector to be collaborating and forming these partnerships with government. So anyway, it's truly, at the end of the day, it's all about collecting the pieces of intelligence so that we can kind of see what the final picture looks like. And now I'll kind of wrap up, Jason, with a little bit of the FBI and kind of more bringing it closer to what we've experienced in the last 7 to 10 days. The FBI's got a mission, right? It's got a stated mission. I used to give it all the time, every time I spoke on behalf of the FBI, and that's to protect the American people. And so how do they do that in the cyberspace? Well, in my opinion, it's pushing out that threat intel to those that need it most. And it's got to be declassified as much as possible and then disseminated. And so vital that to understand that the FBI and a lot of USIC collect a lot of threat intel. So, and what does that look like in cyberspace? It's going to be indicators of compromise. It's going to be tactics, techniques, and practices, TTPs. These are all obvious byproducts of the FBI's investigations, and they're easily shared, to be honest. Most often the attribution, basically who did this, that's the classified part. And what we would do in the FBI is we would let the FireEyes and the CrowdStrikes, we'd let them share that. right? Because they've got their pandas and APTs and bear naming conventions. That's fine. We'll let them talk about attribution. What we need to push out to you, to the private sector, is the motivation and the strategy behind it, and the targeting, and how can we use that to protect ourselves. And so hopefully, if you're on this call and you're listening and you've dialed in, right, you've received or you've been the recipient of maybe some of the FBI's private industry notices. We call those pins, or their investigative flashes. That is the best way that you're going to get information from the government. And it's going to be full of, like I said, valuable and very strategic IOCs. So that's kind of a quick setup, Jason. I'm gonna hand it back to you, but I can't wait for this conversation. So thank you.
Yeah, so thanks, John. Appreciate the insight in framing the conversation. So I'll kind of start this this conversation. I'll ask you, Macy. You know, with all the news that's occurred in the last couple of weeks, you know, what are the implications that we should assess, and what should InfoSec teams do and consider moving forward with all the recent news? And I know it's kind of a big question, but I think that people are you know, questioning their thought process and their mindset on how to react from the most recent news.
So the first thing I want to comment some of the stuff that John said. I think too many times, you know, if you've worked like several of us, where we were, you know, in the defense industrial base and or working for a cleared defense contractor, a CDC, we were given access to that sensitive classified data. So for us, it was extremely valuable for us because either we understood what product, solution, or data we need to go protect, especially if we're in a very large organization with multiple divisions that built or did different things. But a lot of commercial, I can't tell you how many times I've heard a CISO or a VP say, well, I don't get, you know, and excuse my French, I don't get crap from them. They show up and they tell me that I'm compromised, but they can't give me any data. And understand that, back to what John was talking about, that type of data that they can't share, it's usually that attribution has come from some kind of a TTP or a human source, that if they gave you that data, it could possibly compromise them getting more data. So understand that getting whatever you get is probably the best. That you just need to understand that. And that's just a personal thing I always try to stress, because I see the frustration, because I've been in a non-classified area of where I can't get that data, especially after you know what it is or know the value of it. But you just have to understand they're doing the best that they can, and they really are trying to share. The other thing is, these announcements that come out from the FBI or DHS, please take that data and use it. Don't just brush it off as if it's just, you know, something that's not as important as the intel that you're paying for from a vendor. It really is important, or they wouldn't be giving it to you. So sorry, Jason, I'll get off my soapbox, but you know, the one thing I think that people in the industry need to take away from this is there's been a lot of attacks. I mean, you've got the SolarWinds, you've got FireEye, you've got U.S. Treasury, you've got all these different agencies. And when it comes down to it, this is the latest attacks are actually something that a format that don't typically occur, where it's actually going into the supply chain. Those are very hard to find, very hard to protect against, and it's not something that typically happens. But I would say is, now that they're seeing that it works, it will happen a lot more. I think the biggest thing that companies can do, and security professionals, is not go the sky is falling and think that if I go drop in this product or solution or this, that it's going to solve a problem. You should still be taking a strategic approach to building out your security programs. And when I mean that, the overall program, not a piece of software, and putting the different checks and balances in place, taking a real look at resiliency of your organization and how you build things. Because, you know, I just like everybody else, I've probably gotten 15 to 20 emails today from every partner in the world of here's how we're solving the problem. Well, there is no Easter egg that's going to give you that. You need to take that holistic approach and look at your program. You need to understand where your data is. You know, you need to understand the crown jewels, like John said. So, and I could go on forever, so I don't want to, but I think I kind of answered what you were looking for, Jason.
Yeah, thanks, Macy. Matt Stamper, anything that you could add from your perspective on that question, that same question?
I think one of the critical lessons learned from what we're seeing over the last couple of weeks is that we need to be fundamentally prepared, kind of almost assume compromise and make sure and validate that our incident response plans are up to date, that we've got scenarios and run books and playbooks to address any number of different scenarios. So I would say one of the most critical things right now is if you have an incident response plan, take it out, dust it off, validate it. I'm conducting a couple of exercises over the course of the next 3 or 4 days that just happen to have been scheduled during this time. But I think most organizations right now, including the executive leadership teams and the boards of directors, should ask, how well prepared are we to address different types of scenarios, whether it's a compromise of an underlying kind of third-party tool that we're using or an internally derived system. I think just making sure your incident response plans are up to date and tested is really critical based on what we're seeing.
That's the key part, tested.
That's great. Thanks, Matt. Chris Forbes, just question for you in regards to, you know, the tool sets, you know, and one of the recent you know, news was that the FireEye tool set is now generally available, or it's out there in the darks, you know, in the dark with the bad guys. So what should companies be thinking about relative to that tool set, and what does it mean that it's out there?
So first, I'll say, while this may or may not be a wake-up call for a lot, the ability to resize our adversaries' capabilities, their motivations, their sheer force, and how much collateral damage. So a lot of folks that may not have been primary targets were swept up simply because they were running the wrong piece of software and just happened to come up on those sweeps. So first and foremost, brush off your risk assessments and make sure you understand, you know, something. If you had thought we were not a target and nobody's going to use such advanced techniques on us, think again, right? Mm-hmm. I think what we all are constantly recognizing and acknowledging is that we have very motivated adversaries. They're very organized, very well funded. They are extremely good at what they do, and they're only getting better. Their precision and their ability to orchestrate and automate massive scale from start to finish, from finding a vulnerability, building the exploits, finding the target lists, and then just methodically exploiting and taking advantage of that and building from there, should be the wake-up call for the entire industry to say we have to organize better, we have to coordinate better. I agree completely with John Carruthers' statement that says, you know, and the government is part of that solution, right? They can't just have a special purpose sitting on the side. They have to be part of the community defense and part of the community response. Share what you have, contribute and learn, right? You're an active participant and contributor as well. So hopefully we'll continue to see steps in that direction. I know off the record, we have a lot of colleagues on that side of the fence too, and they want to do the right thing, and in some cases their hands are tied. The other thing I'll say about tooling is, whenever possible, take the time and make sure you have the ability to detect. And so in some cases, people said, yeah, I've deployed a tool, I have a intrusion detection, I'm covered, right? Well, maybe not, right? Those tools are only as good as the intelligence and the diligence that you put into supporting them and keeping them up to date. And whether it's the, the FireEye or any of the other recent activities, a lot of groups had to go back and revisit their detection capabilities. The reason FireEye used these tools is because they were good at getting around the vast majority of common defense tools out there. They wouldn't use them if they didn't work, right? So the wake up call for all the IT and security engineering teams is go back and make sure your detection works, test it, and make sure that you have a process and procedure for keeping it up to date, right, on an ongoing basis, not just whenever bad news hits the press.
Yeah, and I was just going to say exactly to that point, because I was talking to a client this morning, and we were chatting, and I want to make two comments. One on the adversaries are so well funded and resourced and everything else. I actually I could see the fear, which is not what I wanted to do, because I just wanted to educate in the individual's eyes. But when I said, and this was something, Chris, you and I were chatting about just the other day, is give an example with like China. They have, roughly, and again, these are guesstimates because we don't know, roughly about 1.5 operatives that do this for a living. It's their job. I don't hold it against them. It sucks for us, but I don't. It's what their job is. And
1.5 million. Yeah, that's a huge army to go up against.
Yeah, considering this individual, he has about 6 people on his security team. They have to fight for their budget. These individuals have unlimited budgets. In one sense, where John was talking about the blend between kind of criminal and nation state. Nation states are starting to use criminal activity to be able to fund their operations with ransomware and things like that. And so, it is not a fair fight. So you keeping those things, like you said, up to date, or, these tools were, FireEye immediately put out on GitHub the ability to alert on these. Every one of your vendors should have their feet, I'm going to sound like Stamper for a minute, their feet held to the fire to go and put those, essentially TTPs into their solution so that you can alert on it. Because you've already paid for tools that now you need to make sure your team has that process, like Chris said, to update, but also that your vendors are putting things in there so that you can.
Yeah. I'll mention 2 other thoughts just to kind of round out the thought. Red teaming exercises, very invaluable, right? Sometimes tools can't detect legitimate use or living off the land. And also consider historic compromise assessments. Given the time frame of the main issue from March to June or July, you may have to go back into your archives to see if in fact there was an incursion or an infiltration that may not be active at the moment, but may have occurred during those timeframes as well. So challenge your teams, dig up those logs, make sure you do everything necessary to reestablish trust in your environment and the integrity of your process. If you find anything suspicious, then keep the command and control center up and dig until you understand the full extent and can communicate appropriately. But
yeah, don't just pull it because they'll go to sleep, or they'll use another Easter egg and a month later that you don't know about. Don't just immediately yank it offline. That's the quickest way to not cleaning it up.
And this is to all the panelists. I'll ask this question, and Chris, you bring up a really good point about detection. Matt, you just talked about preparedness. I think many of us would assume that Mandiant, being a security company, would have had a good detection. Through these latest threats, what did we really learn about the response of some of these threats, on how the companies dealt with it, that would be valuable for this group to know about? What was some of the key insight that we could draw from what transpired, and what could we do with that information?
Can I say something just real quick, and I promise I'll drop it off to the other panelists? you don't understand that if this was the, and again, all of these are still under investigation. So any data that's coming out right now, you can't guarantee is 100% for attribution or anything else. It most likely is they've hit the mark, but I'm just putting that out there. But if it's these individual groups, they are so good. I don't care if it's Mandiant, FireEye, or anybody else. You usually only see the C team coming. You don't see the B or A team. They get in, they get out. Counterintelligence has been going on, which is exactly what this is, for, since before I was born, and all the way back to when military groups, before technology, gathering information. So this literally, the fact that they got popped and the way that it occurred, again, not all the information's out, so we don't know if that's truly what it is. It's not something you can fully look at them and say that they were at fault at all. So sorry, Chris, you were going to say something.
Yeah, not that we ever want to just say it's only because of a weakness in one area of our practice, but I will highlight third-party security because that happens to be the key theme. And in some cases, or in most cases, the bar that a company is able to put a product through is much lower than if they were running that product themselves, right? Yep. So I think we're a little too quick to trust third parties and say, oh, they're a big organization. They have, lots of folks doing QA and security testing. I just want to trust them. But I think we always are reminded that it takes a lot to establish trust. And in some cases, you have to challenge your vendors or put them into an untrusted sort of scenario where you're monitoring. Trust but verify, absolutely. And especially when you allow somebody a privileged connection to your networks. And in the case of performance monitoring, it's an IT tool. Well, from a security perspective, it is another entry point, as we've all seen. So I would encourage folks to take a look at your current technologies landscape and your current third-party arrangements and say, have I maybe overextended trust? Have I been too quick to sort of just assume that stuff's safe and it can connect to my network or to my facilities or to my locations, to my people? And use that as sort of the lesson learned, now what, next step. Try to avoid or at least catch up on any legacy debt that you may have and make sure you're in a comfortable place, that you have strong security controls anywhere that you're exposed.
To add to Chris's point, I think one of the dynamics that we see when we have tool sets that have elevated privileges within the environment, whether it's endpoint protection, endpoint detection and response, monitoring tools, application monitoring tools, and the like, all of those in the aggregate create an amalgam of risk that the organization needs to understand. And just to weigh in a little bit on Chris's point, our adversaries, as both Macy and Chris have noted, and John as well, are extraordinarily well tooled. They've got extremely high competency in what they're doing. The tradecraft to be able to affect one of these breaches is pretty significant. In many cases also, they're very automated. And one of the challenges that I see is that most of our security architecture, most of our incident response still tends to be highly manual. And we're going up against highly skilled, highly automated adversaries. And so there is an asymmetry there that we need to start thinking about. How can we detect things earlier? How can we automate responses to different types of issues that we see in our networks, in our applications across our user base? So I think that's one of the lessons learned is we have a fundamental asymmetry there. What are some of the things that we can do to assuage that concern?
Yeah, and you got to understand these teams. I mean, they have recon teams, they have development teams. And I don't mean just like development as part of the process of going in. I mean, you need a new tool, you need this, great. Well, they literally have hundreds of people building stuff that is not out there in those COTS machines. And, when you look at some of the recent attacks where, it came in with a third-party solution, I mean, it's not like they used malware. They just put a backdoor right into the software update. It was valid. There's no reason you should have seen that. And it's there. So, I mean, and like I said in the beginning, now that that they have seen this works, you don't think that that's a direction they're going to keep going, which means then any device out there could be at risk. It could be your iPhone. It could be your Android. It could be your son or daughter's PlayStation.
Yeah, I'll add that as we size our adversary, to Macy's point, the ability to find those weaknesses in commercially available products at scale, they didn't just stumble on that. They have the machinery and tooling to reverse engineer and find those weak patterns in commercial products, and they are systematically looking, how can we exploit them? And so I imagine they have a queue of exploit possibilities that they're going to try the next, right? So this is not a one and done. This is absolutely just tipping their hand to what they are capable of and how they are mobilized.
Well, and let's be honest with the counterintelligence abilities that they have. I mean, they're looking at everything on the recon team. I guarantee they're watching everything on all these attacks that pops up on LinkedIn, Facebook. They're probably sitting on this listening. They easily could, honestly, without any issue. So
just raise their hand.
Yeah, if they wouldn't be listening and doing that type of stuff, they wouldn't be able to have the skill set and tradecraft, as Matt said, to be able to do what they do. So
it's interesting. I've unmuted about 4 times since we've begun this discussion, but I keep muting again because I'm afraid of engaging in FUD. But I will tack on to what all of the panelists have talked about with regards to like nation state resourcing and the bountiful budgets that they're dealing with and the actual people. I had a case in the FBI towards the end of my career where my squad, we were investigating a Chinese actor group, or just that, a Chinese group. We started that investigation in 2012. We ended it in 2019. These groups are extremely patient, right? And so that's why I think we had a discussion amongst the panelists before this webinar. How deep into the technical details are we going to get on the FireEye breach or SolarWinds? And I think we decided as a collective or as a group that we're not going to do that, because what we know today, and this is so fresh, but what we know today is likely not going to be the epilogue even next week. And so, that's the whole point of this discussion. And back to you, Jason. But is just kind of framing, what we're dealing with, and how can we help, and how can we help one another. But yeah, I just wanted to kind of throw that out there.
Yeah, John. So on that topic, with your background and your experience, we've seen it seemingly increased velocity of these kinds of attacks, and the panelists have talked about automation and the scale of the resources. Do we expect this to increase exponentially, or what is the consideration for, how do we address the news? What should we be thinking about from a velocity standpoint with the scale of the adversary?
Yeah. So Jason, again, my opinion, and Macy kind of touched on this earlier, but we're not seeing anything drastically different, as far as the motivations or the methodologies. I mean, sure, we've seen a little more sophistication, absolutely. But I personally don't see an uptick necessarily in overall activity. What we're seeing now is just the targeting changed, like we talked about FireEye and SolarWinds. Well, I mean, FireEye, these are big targets. This is big game hunting. And you will see that on occasion. We're going to have spikes like that throughout, that we discover kind of on the battlefield. But yeah, I don't see necessarily an uptick because this is what's been, we've all been dealing with this. Most of the people calling in hopefully are aware of the information security space, and anybody who is or who's living and breathing this, this is what we deal with, week in and month out.
That's great. Thanks, John.
Can I add a point, Jason, to that is when we think about what we're trying to accomplish is higher level assurance, trust, confidence in the applications and the infrastructure that we run and manage. This is an inordinately complicated space. Application development is horrifically challenging in today's environment. The linkages between the application and the underlying infrastructure are really challenged. And I think one of the things that is perhaps not as well understood by members of the executive leadership team and boards of directors from a number of companies is just how inordinately complicated it is to have high quality, high assurance, highly secure environments running at scale. And I think one of the things that we do have to think about is how do we change that dynamic? How do we, other industries have kind of safety and other assurances built into their products. You think about underwriter laboratories and all that type of stuff. Most software that is delivered is effectively disclaimed of any warranty and has extraordinarily limited liability as part of that. And I think we're going to get to a point, especially as we start to have more operational technology connected into IP networks and kind of traditional IT, where the consequences of bad security might actually be life and death. You know, like you might actually end up injuring people because a medical device that should have been locked down wasn't. And ultimately, that kind of veil of disclaimed warranties is going to crack. And I think once that happens, we have a very significant kind of unfunded liability that's going to hit our economy that we need to be prepared for.
Well, and honest, I mean, when you think about it, that type of activity occurred a long time ago in the defense side with drones. And those are both weaponized and ones that just take pictures. So if they can do that, you think they can't easily get a heart monitor or change someone's prescription or this or that? Those kinds of things. But we're also getting into, you know, I want to be careful to stay away from the sky is falling, but you know, when it comes down to it, I agree with Matt. I think at some point it's going to get that next up level because they've already shown that they can do whatever they need to do. You know, and I think it comes back to, again, I hate to say it, the basics. I mean, Chris talked about logging, and it's not just, oh, I've got logs and I can go look at it from the last 6 months. They could have most likely been camping for the last 1.5 to 2 years. Because again, they're comfortable. So you want to have logs, you know, length of logs. You know, I did get a little nervous, the fact that they're using more sophisticated stuff now, just for the fact that most nation state groups usually use, you know, the stuff that always works, the crap. Because, you know, they don't want to give up their crown jewels. So usually when I see something like that, where they've kind of taken it up a next level, it makes me wonder what else is in their tool bag that I don't know about.
This is great intelligence. I mean, this is, I don't want to say they put all the cards on the table, but they certainly showed a part of their hand. And
Yeah,
so
I
we
would
can
bet
leverage
somebody's
this.
getting chewed out. Yeah, I bet
Yeah,
someone's
absolutely,
getting chewed
but we
back
can,
at home.
yeah, I mean,
We
No, I
shouldn't
said we don't-
underestimate as well the significant kind of human side of this. You know, every one of us in one form or another is a walking material weakness, the way I like to describe myself from time to time. The human element in terms of social engineering individuals within organizations. You think about all of the different things that have occurred over the last few years, the OPM breach, et cetera. There are dossiers on many of us that are out there that are actively being used to inform how we look at social media, how we react to emails, any number of different things. And that tradecraft as well is every bit as important and likely more efficacious than some of the really, wow, that was a fascinating technique that they used in this PowerShell script. So we need to be cognizant, I think, of that as well.
Well, being careful on every article you click on to read about this, because honestly, if I was them, that's the first thing I'd be weaponizing.
Watering holes.
Yeah, exactly. So there's
Yeah,
a question, Jason. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut over somebody. There's a
no, that's fine.
question in the chat. Do you want me to read it, Jason, or?
Yeah, let me just ask one final question and then we can go
Sure.
to the chat if that's
Oh, yeah.
okay.
Sorry, no worries.
So, you know, with all the experience on this panel, you've seen and witnessed many different reactions or different responses to a threat or a breach, and it's formed your opinion on you know, how to be prepared. What things would you recommend an organization do to look at their, you know, to basically go through an exercise to determine whether or not they're really prepared or not for this, and maybe give some perspective on some of the things that you've seen where someone has responded really well, and what kind of exercises they may have gone through to get to that point.
I'll jump in if I could just briefly. I think there's a couple of things that every organization should consider doing. One is a threat model, which is very distinct from kind of threat intelligence or a threat landscape. A threat model is you evaluate some of your core applications, core infrastructure, core services in something as simple as a STRIDE methodology, where STRIDE stands for spoofing, tampering, repudiation, information disclosure, denial of services, and elevation of privileges. So STRIDE represents all the negative things that could happen to a business process, to an application or infrastructure. And then you look and evaluate whether you that you have the appropriate kind of defensive mechanisms to address that. I also think that MITRE's attack framework is very helpful. You can go through and evaluate, do we have blind spots within our existing security architecture? Are there things that we should see that we don't see? And then effectively ask, why aren't we seeing that? So even with all the news that's taking place, I'm actually cautiously optimistic with the advent of SOAR tools, with some of the frameworks like MITRE, and greater recognition and support by executive leaders and boards of directors that security is tough and we need to resource it and staff it and skill it appropriately, that we can start to close some of these gaps.
Awesome.
And Jason, I'll jump in too and kind of close the circle on my point with government. You know, when I was in the FBI, one of the things that I coined, one of the phrases was Project BAFA, and it stood for, you know, befriend an FBI agent. And it worked really well until I started telling my analyst friends, and they were like, well, what about us? And I said, it still works, befriend an FBI analyst. And it still worked until I talked to one of my DHS buddies. And he said, but I'm not in the FBI. And I said, it still works because it's befriend a federal agent or analyst. But anyway, the whole point is leverage the FBI, leverage the government. There are so many resources available free of charge that you can ingest into your cybersecurity and information security strategy. People would ask, when do I call the FBI after I've been breached? And I said, you don't call after, you call before you've been breached. You don't want to have to work through a very difficult and convoluted, you know, automated call tree when it's easier just to have somebody in your Rolodex. I'm dating myself, but yes, do that. Leverage the government, leverage all the resources that are available. Join InfraGard. The list is voluminous, and we'll happily push it out, or I'll happily put something together for all of the attendees after this. No worries at all. But I did want to kind of put that out there as far as leverage your government resources to the fullest extent.
Let me add two of my favorites as well. First, some of the intel has indicated the place in the development and delivery life cycle that were compromised, right? And so I encourage everyone to take a look at that entire life cycle for how products make their way into your environment and how updates are pushed into your environment. You may have great, you know, strong controls and processes, you know, up front, but if you've got weak build, weak deployment, weak, you know, file integrity management capabilities, you know, I think our adversaries are good at finding those and taking advantage of those. The second is firewall rules. You know, a lot of them say, yeah, I got a firewall, but they don't take the time to figure out what is legitimate, necessary traffic and what is just unnecessary. I think CISOs need to potentially start blocking a lot more traffic until it's proven valuable to the organization. We are far too trusting with our core networks to stuff that is not mission critical. And so definitely, tune and tweak those tools that you already have, but take the time to do the homework. And in some cases, take a harder line stance to block stuff that just presents a risk. No value, all risk.
Back to your point, Chris,
So-
trust but verify.
Yeah, I can't agree
Absolutely.
more. Actually, I had a somewhat of a short list, but they're all the basics. But one of them, Chris, really was that, one of the strongest tools that in one of my CISO roles that we did was we looked at all the egress filtering. And honestly, I mean, don't get me wrong, the actors are going to use 80 and 443 and tunnel it anyway. But all the stuff that you have wide open just going out the front door, you might as well at least shut, 90% of that down. It's a big project because you worry about ticking off your executives or some team that's got this special app that no one knows about that's running on that board. But it's the simple things of just monitoring and making a decision and setting your baselines. I got to reiterate, John, again, having those connections beforehand is absolutely invaluable. And just having that partnership where you're, at times at some of my old roles, John was actually the agent or someone on a squad was assigned to me or to our organization. And we probably met easily weekly. I mean, anything that just didn't look right or was curious about, they're glad to usually depend on their resources to take a look at it. And have them in your phone because you don't want to have to, I've numerous times I've got someone calling me and saying, do you know an agent in, Denver and, Las Vegas and Washington, DC or this or that. And we go and connect them, but that company should already have that in part of their IR process.
In the spirit of value add, obviously I will make those connections to anybody that needs them across the country. So that's not a problem, but go ahead, Mace. Sorry.
No, that's perfect. The IR practicing then and tabletops that Mr. Stamper spoke about. I mean, those again, if you're not practicing it, I mean, let's be blunt. When it happens, it's not going to go the way you practiced it anyway. But at least if you have it 80% there, you're not sitting frozen, which I've seen many teams do. The other one that that Chris spoke about, logging. I can't tell you how many people just don't log certain stuff. And when it comes down to it, especially in your Active Directory, I mean, those and some of your more sensitive like credential tools like a PAM or something like those are going to be targets for the actors. I mean, put a little bit more noisemakers around those things to know when somebody's checking the lock on the door or something. So these are some of the different areas. Another area which has come up a lot in the last year or two, and I know Mr. Stamper has a strong point on this, is deception. A lot of people looked at it as kind of like, oh, it's just, that's something, that's just honeypots or it's this or that. I almost look at that if you're not using it within your environment, especially on sensitive areas, you're a fool. You really need to be kind of focused and having that extra, if someone's crawling around in there, that they're touching the wrong thing. And again, personal opinion, nothing more. Threat modeling was the last one because I think we're seeing organizations, at all levels creating threat intel teams. They're typically hiring somebody like a John or someone from the analyst side to come in and build a threat intel team, which I had this discussion earlier today with someone that, it's not just a person, it's a team for a reason. And it's whether you're utilizing outside organization or building it inside, you need to have the right skill set and the right set of people. So, Jason, back to you for that question.
Yeah, I do. This is a question from the broader group here, and I'll just read it from the chat and maybe make a little little remark, but considering the source of this being a nation state, what do you think are the chances that other products are out there that are already compromised and we just have not discovered it? And so, that's a good question, but also, should companies think about swapping out one product for another simply because they heard about it being breached? And so I think that would be some good context for the question.
I'll add 100% sure. We just can't answer you what product will come next, but absolutely the fact that they've demonstrated this approach says that it wasn't a one and done. So just take that to heart, go back and reestablish trust. Getting rid of one vendor in exchange for another doesn't establish more trust. And not that we want vendors to fail, but I will refer back to one of the studies that showed after a company has been breached, they tend to go and fix things the right way, right? And so I would almost go the other way. If they haven't been forced to improve their skills and their processes, maybe you find one that has, lived through that as well.
Yeah, look at Zoom.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
I agree. Or Target. And, I almost say in the old days because it feels like it was so long ago, but once they realized what happened and strengthened up their stuff, that's the one place I got no problems, give them my credit card. Because they actually felt the pain and went and addressed it versus somebody that maybe hasn't gone through it. So.
And hope is not a strategy.
Yes, exactly.
Well, that's great. We don't have any additional questions right now in Q&A, and I will just, I'll just ask maybe a parting question. What else can people do to learn more about these kinds of issues or things that they can improve their security posture in the future?
I'll mention two just to get the dialogue started. So first, and I think John started to mention this, identify and join your local information sharing and analysis center, the ISACs. So whether it's your industry specific one, the multi-state, the financial services, the retail, they're there for a reason. The community is stronger when we work together. Take advantage of that, befriend it. They are absolutely invaluable tools. I have been a member of the financial services one for about a decade. And I can tell you, I rely on 10,000 other CISOs doing the exact same job to share it heads up and good information back and forth.
And no matter what sector you swim in, there's going to be an ISAC for you. So
Exactly.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, and also other organizations like in San Diego, we run a San Diego CISO Roundtable. It's got about 120 members. Well, we have always had someone from the Bureau as part of that roundtable, sitting to be able to provide, if anything goes on, they can provide a brief. It also shortens kind of the leash on the connection between the community and the agencies, so that at least you know who you can go call. So
one thing I would recommend is just assume compromise, because I think it's a matter of when, not if, which gets overstated, but it's very much a true thing. Validate and test your incident response plan. Consider doing threat modeling using Stride, even if it's not formalized. Let's say I'm reporting to somebody and he comes up or she comes up and just asks, what would you do if this system were compromised? Or how would you look at the ability to spoof user credentials for this application? Any of those sorts of activities in the aggregate increase awareness for the company. Leverage the MITRE attack and its corresponding kind of proactive or active defense shield, but use MITRE attack and just ask basic open-ended questions of your security team, your colleagues within infrastructure and operations. What is it that we don't see that we should see, and why don't we? And then how do we remediate that as timely as possible?
I'll add one additional one. Always review and update your security architecture.
Yes.
And ensure you have defense in depth. do not rely solely on a singular control, because it could be a bad day. It could be any number of things that if I only have to get around one control, I will find a way to do that. But if I don't see the decoys, the deception, the multi-layered processes and approach, more than likely you will catch your adversary somewhere in that depth, in that defense. So definitely continuously review and update your security architecture.
Agreed. Can I
100%.
throw one more thing out there too? The actors are after intellectual property and data. I mean, that's literally what it is. They're not coming in, they're not stealing a computer off your desk, they're not stealing a wrench out of the toolbox. Well, in most cases. But they are coming in for data. Most organizations, and this is whether or not I was a CISO there or what I see from some of our clients, their data is everywhere. So understanding what your crown jewels are, what really matter, and then you need to be able to focus that additional control set and monitoring and alerting around those areas, so that you can see, as Chris said, something starts to change, you need to know about it. So that's probably the one thing that I see, because a lot of the areas where people fall victim is really at the basics. It's not always malware coming across, but I will tell you that vulnerability patching and management is something that's been around forever, and everybody sucks at it. I don't care how big or small you are. And it's usually because it's just so hard to keep up with. So.
That's great. Well, hey, it's 12:57. I'm just going to say a few words and then wrap this up before the hour is up. But I wanted to thank everybody that joined the community today. The community, the cybersecurity community, specifically the Evotech community, is really important to us. It's part of one of our core values. We feel very strongly that a good, knowledgeable community in the cybersecurity sector enables us to protect ourselves and mitigate these kinds of threats. And so we'll be doing more of these kinds of briefings to gain more knowledge, share with each other best practices, things that we can do to make our lives safer, our workplaces safer, and our community safer. So we will be doing a cybersecurity summit in January on the 15th. There'll be a lot more individual details and workshops about how we can implement better practices, but it's a great opportunity to really get closer, share best practices and information with all your peers. And we look forward to having you if you can make it on the 15th. So with that, I'll conclude. Thanks again for joining. We appreciate everybody, and we'll talk to you hopefully January 15th.
Sounds good. Thanks, everybody.
See you guys. Thank you.